Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I have a senior supply chain leader from India, Mr. Mohan Ramaswamy. Mohan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Ashutosh. Thank you so much.
Mohan is the co-founder at Terrago Logistics Private Limited. So Mohan, tell me a little bit about Terrago Logistics and what was your motivation to start the venture?
So Terrago is actually a digital company, and we call it as an integrated logistics supply chain solutions company, which has got both its physical services as a digital arm, and it's a very asset-light company, and it's motivationally looking at green logistics to propagate in the country. We started this venture in 2017 along with my co-founder Sukhpreet Dhariwal. The real motivation was that we were already into this 18 years plus into logistics, and we were working on the procurement, logistics, and supply chain solutions as a corporate leaders. We want to get into the entrepreneurship, looking at opportunities and efficiencies that we could drive using our solutions. Okay. That's the key motivation.
Okay. And given all your experience, how do you see the supply chain function evolving over the last 2 decades?
Tremendously. I would say it's been a movement, I would say, from a transactional nature to something like a tactical to now a strategic nature. Let me qualify that. Like earlier, it used to be more like sending out purchase orders, talking to vendors, getting the material in, out, that's it. It became a bit more tactical when people started doing more around category management, looking at this piece around how do I procure better, how do I manage my vendors better, etc. Now it's actually a strategic function. The chief supply chain officer practically sits in the leadership role today. And typically you would have 3 to 4 different areas to look at strategically for the organization. One is operational excellence. The second would be definitely driving the efficiencies through procurement, etc. 3 would be in terms of managing the categories in a global way. It's no more a national category management. Typically people look at global way. 4th is about compliances. There's a huge compliance structures which are built around managing either the workplace management, or be it the contractual management, or be it the international transactions which you have.
Right.
Lastly, but not the least, is sustainability. So the chief supply chain officer today also has a role to play in the sustainability, not just for his own function, but for his entire value chain, upstream and downstream.
Okay. And over the last 2.5 years or 3 years, how has the pandemic impacted supply chains?
I would say, well, I would not talk about disruption, what really happened. But I think what it really has brought in is about 3 or 4 key things that, we could look at from a behavior perspective.
Right.
One is the lethargy to change. This function as such, when people look at logistics, procure, transportation, etc., was a really lethargic function. It was right at the back end of the entire corporate world. The lethargy to change has tremendously changed. People now want to adopt faster technologies, faster deliveries, newer ways of customer services. That's one. The second thing which has really pandemic has done is it has given the importance to the human capital.
Right.
I think so far we were looking at typically, driver, the workmen on the warehouses. They were probably the last leg of the chain. This pandemic really brought them to the forefront. People realize the importance of the human capital. I think a lot of steps have been taken by many organizations how to improvise that human capital today. Okay. Lastly, I think this pandemic also has broken some benchmarks. So I could earlier sit down and say, what's my average last 2 years rates? What's been my cost of capital last 2 years? What's been my per unit cost of working? Those benchmarks are gone. So today, everyone needs to work on a bottoms up. so that they are able to do a business looking at the bottoms up costing, and then how do you work on that.
Very interesting.
So that's what has really changed.
Very interesting. And yet, I've been speaking to many supply chain leaders. What are some of the vulnerabilities that continue to exist in supply chains?
Today, as I see, when I talk of vulnerabilities, for me, I think I look at this as three things which are not just national or limited to our own India stuff. We look at firstly the human capital. I think this is big vulnerability today in every supply chain, be it e-commerce industries, be it the normal FMCG industries, be it IT. Working either for supply chain or any other industry.
Right.
Human capital has become one of the key risks for any organization to grow. I think if people adapt that faster, get awareness of that faster, and put in strategic measures to improvise their own human capital. Now there can be multiple measures for different industry.
Right.
But I would say this is one.
Okay.
The second, I would say for Indian industry supply chain to grow, I think a huge dependence today on the Forex is something which I feel is again a very big vulnerability today. A lot of imports still are happening either because of dependence on the Chinese market or because of the West European markets and US markets. Technology still is imported, a lot of it. And therefore, I think the Forex is one key thing which we need to be wary about. And that's really, a big risk. Thirdly, I think the infra. We are way behind, I think, in the infra stuff. And I think there are multiple steps which have been taken by the government. But I think looking at the overall infra today, I think we are way behind. And these are still, loopholes to be plugged, in my opinion.
Wonderful. And what are some of the areas in the infrastructure that you think still needs to get more inputs?
So within the infra, if I were to look at, I think our last 5 to 7 years, I think in the current government, we have done wonderfully well on the road infra. I think we have, developed fantastic highways. We have made inroads into tier 1 and tier 2 cities. When I travel across the nation, I find that today roads is super as compared to what they were probably about 15 years back.
Right.
As well. There were only pockets that we have done well. What really needs to do better, I suppose, is around the ports.
Okay.
I think around the ports, the infrastructure is way behind what we would expect from our international standards. The second, I would say, is warehousing. I think today, warehousing as a organized sector is probably less than 10%. We still have a very unorganized warehousing sector today. And I think probably will be the next boost that needs in the Indian context.
Very
I
interesting.
think these two, I would say, typically would help go a long way.
Fantastic. And, you also spoke about foreign exchange being a risk. My next question to you, Mohan, is how or what, in your opinion, is the way a supply chain head can mitigate risk, more particularly because the chief supply chain officer now is a part of the C-suite?
Yeah, absolutely. See, I think he has to wear two hats, typically, what I say. One is now and one is tomorrow. Now, typically, the C-suite guy cannot say, all I will do is manage my KPIs and therefore, that's the best possible strategy to adopt.
Right.
So the way I would look at this is he has to manage relationships today, to work with his vendor partners, banking partners, financing partners, all across, to manage some of the risk. At the same time, he has to look at what is my operational excellence programs, which will drive benefits year on year, next 2 years to next 3 years. So that's one, typical work he has to do. Secondly, he has to look at some of the compliance and sustainability metrics today as well, versus a cost that's going to be involved in managing them.
Okay.
Because this cost is going to be put in today as a project. to manage a long-term benefits to the organization. That's the second big piece which he has to look at.
Sure.
Thirdly, he has to adopt to new technologies. It's a no-brainer. He will have to take on new technologies, adapt. But at the same time, his challenge is to manage the change management within his organization. So these, I think, are the big, changes which he has to do today to manage his risks across. I'm not just saying about Forex, but across.
I agree with you. Agree. So let's now move on. You spoke initially about technology and use of technology and how important it is. My next question to you, Mohan, is how is technology changing supply chains?
Right. See, I think earlier we used to have something called as, we used to work, I'm talking about 20 years back, right? The technology used to be basically something called inventory management system and something about order processing system. Later on, with advent of late 90s, with SAP coming into picture, it gave an enterprise resource planning structure.
Right.
Over the time, I think this enterprise resource planning has moved on to become more encompassing, to manage planning, to manufacturing, to delivery, to working capital management. Now, all that was basically the legacy systems which were on the servers, etc. I think today, as we speak about, all that is gone into cloud. Typically, any small scale or large scale companies can work on the cloud to get these technologies.
Right.
Many of the codes are freewares, so people can develop them from the cloud. Thirdly, I think most importantly is the speed. The technology basically now involves speed, because earlier if I had to implement an SAP program, it would take me 9 months. Today, nobody has that kind of a patience. Correct. I want 3 months. I want my system to be up and running. So the speed of implementation also is something which has really brought in change. Having said that, the adoption, I would say on a scale of 1 to 5 in India would still be around 1.52. We have some distance to cover to make this really see changes in technology to be adopted en masse. It is still very limited. And unless until it reaches the last man in the value chain, we can't say that technology has been, done a great shakes work in the country. We are in the process. It is a positive movement. People are adapting, but there's a way to go.
Well said. And do you see, technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, drones, etc., for in the development of supply chains? And if yes, can you give me some examples of how these are being used?
Sure. So I would put it this way. There are pockets where these technologies are definitely, being used today. They are important, but I think we need to first look at the fact, how do I bring in the change for a person to use technology? So I have a typical strategy that we adopt in our own company, is that we first is change what is running operationally today. Make it to a technology-based processes. And then we say automate the processes. And then we bring in the intelligence. So the AI, ML, all these are intelligence features. If I had to bring in that into the systems, I first need to have sufficient database, sufficient users on the platforms that I use. Using that, I can build on this. Having said that, there are pockets where these AI and ML are, being used very, very well. To give you an example, the route planning softwares which are running today in multiple e-commerce industries are pretty much dependent on the AI ML technologies, and they work very well. Secondly, I would say simple maps, Google Maps, which we use today. There's a huge amount of AI at the back end, which works. So today, when you look at our Uber and Ola being used, if I am in Bangalore, it will give me exactly the location which I've used in the last 4 or 5 times, where I typically go at that period of time. That's the critical thing. Similarly, when I look at the ordering systems in e-commerce companies, they give you a proper route mapping for every single customer.
Right.
And Then similarly, customer experiences. So when I look at many of them, they bounce back to me a product or a service which I might have looked into during my searches. These are the areas where it's being used. And typically in supply chain, to go a longer way, I think I would look at how do I preempt an ordering? How do I ensure that I do a pre-order even before the customer knows that this is to be ordered? So these are some of the things which will take some time for it to get set into the system, but it's very much a part and parcel of our technology movement.
Interesting.
Robotics. Robotics, I would say, is being used typically in warehousing today.
Right.
And whether it is managing the inventory, pick pack services, picking services typically, or put up services, these kind of services are being done by robots in many of the warehouses. Different stages of implementation, I would say, and they will come into vogue as we keep improving our warehouse infrastructure. I would like to bring upon one technology which will definitely make a difference is blockchain.
Right. Okay.
Blockchain today is very, very, it's a demon and a devil, and as well as it's a divine invention. We use it well. It can really change the way we look at many of our contractual obligations. Today, that contract management is very, very fluid. So blockchain can really work well wonders when you have multiple parties being tied down to a contract obligation.
Wonderful.
And that's something which I would really think this particular technology can also bring in a huge sea change.
Fantastic. And Mohan, do you see drones being used in our country for last mile delivery?
Very much so. Very much so. There will be certain regulations required for us to overcome the commercial use of drones. But we are in the path. I'm very sure today, as we speak, the commercial trials have happened off and on. But we have some regulatory issues there in security aspects. Unlike probably in the West, we have to be more careful about putting these drone technologies into commercial uses.
Absolutely.
But we'll find a way. We'll definitely find a way to last mile. I'm very sure some of the very critical use cases here are blood banks, vaccines, health saving drugs, probably first aid in case of an accident. I'm sure in these use cases, if we allow drones to work, we can really circumvent and save a lot of lives.
Very interesting. My next question to you, relates to customer expectations. We're now coming out of the pandemic with all the work from home. A lot of us have got used to delivery within 30 minutes.
Yes, absolutely.
Not even saying delivery within 10 minutes.
Yes.
What are these customer promises doing to supply chains?
Speed. I would say, what they're really doing is now and here. One. So the supply chains have to be reorganized to deliver. So if I need to deliver within 5 kilometers in 20 minutes, I need to have smaller warehouses being built closer to that networks. So it's actually driving that change. It's also driving to an extent an employment, I would say, because the delivery boys are required more in number to drive this change in behavior. Thirdly, I would say it's also increasing the cost. Today, the customers are not really feeling the pinch because most of them are being delivered at either free of cost or somebody else is funding them.
Yeah.
But then tomorrow, this cost is going to be borne by the customer. And they will have to be rational enough that I don't order one packet of Parle G biscuits of 5 rupees, which cost me 50 rupees to deliver. So they will be more rational about it.
Yeah.
So my whole take on this quick commerce is that there will be a balance which will be done. You can't sustain a 10-minute and 20-minute deliveries continuously without charging the customer. And therefore, the moment you charge the customer, they are also going to become rational. And therefore, they are going to become, they're going to be more easy about it. And therefore, there'll be a balance between the two, which will be felt.
Very interesting. So I have time for 2 or 3 more questions. My next question to you is on China. China is a large country like India, big population, and they seem to have done a lot of work on supply chains. What can we learn from them?
I'm not an expert on this.
Okay. We leave that out.
But I can say some generic things which I see because of my experiences, in my corporate world. What I see is that China has started investing into their infra probably about 35 years back, and that's paying dividends today. Secondly, I think they figured out that it is not about just domestic consumption, but I also need to look at as well the world consumption as my market. So they developed this SEZs, which typically are extremely well-oiled machinery today. Somehow Indian SEZs really haven't taken off.
Right.
Possibly it is because of the policy structures, possibly because it is the cost which it takes to get a SEC licenses. I wouldn't really be knowing about that, but I think that probably will make a sea change to us.
I understand.
But Make in India program possibly can drive that change today. Is my bet on this.
Very interesting. So I have time for two more questions. My next question is that, what is the role the government should play to support our supply chain? More so because in the last year and a half, 2 years, we have all world leaders talking about supply chains.
Absolutely.
So one is infrastructure you've spoken about, but what are the other areas governments can support?
So I think they've done quite a bit, I would say, in the last 10 to 12 years of governance. They have brought in a logistics department in the country. They have announced a Gati Shakti program, which is all about infrastructure, which supersedes or works along with Sagarmala and Bharatmala programs.
Sure.
They have actually launched something called ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce, which typically looks at supposed to be the next UPI for the e-commerce.
Yeah.
What they could do further, 2 or 3 things which comes to my mind. One is, today EV is the green technology, which even Terrago is propagating through its own electric vehicles in the last mile delivery. I think they should have a standardized policy for EVs across states. Today, every state has its own policy. Can we make a standardized policy, which would help us, go about doing the business very easily?
Yeah.
Second thing, because this is the next future generation for us. Second, I think we are a large economy and we have a very smaller neighbors with whom we still have trying to tie up our logistical supports to drive the economies across our neighbors. So there have been some developments which have been happening like Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal corridors have been built up. Waterways is being propagated between India and Bangladesh. Can we do it further? Can we run this as a single like a Europe, EU? Can I run it like that? Which will make at least this entire regional economy grow up, and India would be the biggest beneficiary.
Sure.
We being the big brother out here. So I think that's the second one. Third, as I mentioned about the SEZs, I think probably yes, there needs to be some work around that so that our exports can grow. I can have the balance of payments becoming better for me as India, and therefore my forex risks are coming down.
Very interesting. And my last question to you, and this is for the many people who will listen to our conversation, what would you say are 3 lessons from your vast experience in supply chains you want our viewers and listeners to take away?
3 behavioral things. I don't want to give gyan like do this, do that. Behavioral things. Be inquisitive like a child. That's the learning curve that you got to be always on.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
That's my first one. The second is always keep changing and pivoting because you cannot actually be at the same stage all the time.
Yeah.
Thirdly, resilience. I think there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be pain areas, but be resilient, keep focus, and keep moving towards your goals. These 3 things I think would be my key takeaways.
Very interesting. Mohan, on that note, and your 3 amazing lessons of be inquisitive, keep pivoting, and have the resilience. Thank you so much for speaking to me about Terrago Logistics, about your journey as a supply chain leader, and also about how technology is being used in supply chains. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.